Today I'm with the Reverend Canon. Reverend Canon?
Yeah, that'll do.
Reverend Canon Peter Ballard, who is priest in charge at Shire's Head at the moment. House for duty there, but without a house. Peter, you live in your own house. And I think the Archdeacon lives in the vicarage at Shire's Head. So, but you're looking after ministry at St James's, that's right?
That's right, yes.
But we go way back. We've been clergy colleagues for the last few years, but our relationship started back in, I think, in 2004, when you appointed me as your youth officer when you were Director of Education, and you were looking for a new youth officer to help with the work of establishing chaplains in high schools.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think I appointed you. I think you were appointed by your wife, who interviewed me, if I remember rightly.
Yes, it was a big move for us as a family, and she wanted to make sure that everything was in place, I think.
It's great. No, yeah, 2004, we had this vision that we wanted to put chaplains in every high school in the diocese, and we were looking for chaplains, but at the same time, the then youth officer, Brian McConkie, went off to be a parish priest, so we were looking for a new youth officer. And as I recall it, you were interested in being a chaplain as well, and we said, "Would you like to be the youth officer, though?" And that's how it happened. But it was one of those moments when, you know, if I were a great evangelical, I would say it was one of those Holy Spirit moments when, you know, we met, and ever since it's been one of the best decisions we ever made.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am an evangelical, and I think exactly that it was one of those Holy Spirit moments. So I think you're absolutely right. You continue to work, Peter, within education for DBE Services. Just tell us briefly a little bit about that.
Yeah, when I was Director of Education, it was very clear that we had to stop reinventing the wheel in every diocese in England. And so we came up with an idea of working together, but then we had to find a mechanism under which we could put an umbrella over that.
Okay.
And it became DBE Services.
Yeah.
Some would say because that's Diocesan Board of Education Services, but it was also DBE Services because if you're not in a church or a church school, you won't know what it means, so it won't put you off that it's a church.
Yeah, sure. And you head up that organisation supporting schools all over the north of England.
Yes, north of England in its widest context, because we have schools in Crewe, and I have to say, if you live in Crewe, they don't believe they live in the north of England. But we do, yeah, we go right to the Scottish border, and from Blackpool to Scarborough. We support about 450 schools at the moment.
Wow, and they're not all church schools now, are they? Lots of community schools?
Lots of community schools, church schools in its broadest sense. So there are Church of England schools, but there are Methodist schools, there are Roman Catholic schools, there's a maintained selective grammar school in that. And so it's schools of all design, like, status, everything. It's as broad as possible because we are a service organisation. That's the first and foremost.
Yeah,
we're there to offer schools help in any way that we possibly can.
That's great. Thank you for that, Peter. We've just heard the gospel reading for this Sunday, which I have to say is probably in that category of words of Jesus that I wish he'd never said, because there's some difficult words in there. He's sending out his disciples on the mission field, and he's reminding them that life is not going to be easy for them, that they're going to face persecution, that they're going to face trials. And in the end, Jesus, at the end of that reading, Jesus says, you've got to take up your cross and follow me, and whoever loses their life will gain it, but that comes at some cost to them, obviously losing their lives for the sake of the gospel. So that's very difficult to hear. I mean, we perhaps don't experience persecution in this country quite so much as Christians do across the world, but life is difficult sometimes for Christians, isn't it? I mean, I know, just going back to education for a moment, there are those in our society who wish and also campaign against the fact that we should even have church schools at all, because they say that education is not the place for the gospel to be proclaimed. What do you make of all that, being in education?
Well, yeah, I mean, the history of education in this country has the church running all the way through it. I mean, even in the city of Lancaster, you can go back to the 12th, 13th century, when the nuns of Zion founded what is now the Royal Grammar School.
Yep.
Lots of schools were founded as church schools. And in 1811, Joshua Watson founded the National Society, which built hundreds of church schools across England to help support urbanisation. And at the root of it was being there to help and support people, but also to teach them the gospel and to teach them the gospel principles. When I hear, and over the years I've had my run-ins with the Secular Society and various other people, but the bottom line is that no school in England, church school, community school, or any other, is doing anything that isn't part of the law of England. The law of England says that every school should have an act of collective worship every day, which should be mainly Christian, and that RE should be taught, and it should be mainly Christian. Of course you teach about the faiths. Of course you teach about Black Lives Matter. That's just as important, but we're not doing anything that isn't rooted in being English.
Absolutely, yeah. And while there were those who they actively campaigned, I guess, to prevent the promotion of the Christian faith anywhere, but particularly in schools, the gospel's always been important in your ministry wherever you've been. I know we had some exciting times developing the chaplaincy model in schools, because your passion was that that's the primary place where the Christian faith is going to be passed on. I mean, we'll come on in a moment to, you can say something about the chaplaincy model in a minute, but we'll come on also after that to talk about some of the other exciting things that we did, travelling abroad and visiting various places. But just comment, if you will, Peter, on passing on the Christian faith, because although you're a priest in the Church of England and you serve in a church community, you're still very passionate about the fact that the gospel, the Christian faith, will be passed on through our next generation in our schools.
Yeah, I was not always popular with fellow clergy when I was Director of Education, because it seems to me, however you look at it, the gospel, the faith is going to be passed on in our schools, not in the pews of the parishes of England. I don't know what the figures are today, but when I was Director of Education, clergy were declaring about 5,000 young people under the age of 16 in their pews, when there were 100,000 plus in the schools of the Diocese of Blackburn. And if you look at that, where's it going to be passed on? They're there, well, they were there in those days, perhaps not today, for 40 weeks of the year, 5 days a week, compared to, some. I'm not knocking what parishes, they do a fantastic job, but it has to be a partnership. And that's what I spent a lot of my time as director trying to do, make it a partnership and not see schools, youth work, children's work, preschool work, toddler groups, all as being separate. They were all part of one continuum, and they were the same people, the same clergy, the same parishioners, the same Christians, and we needed to work together.
Yeah, of course, and that's a really good vision of what really effective parish ministry looks like, isn't it? With lots of community groups, toddler groups and Sunday school and the day school all working together for the promotion of the Christian faith. I think that's it's a brilliant vision, and one that we try to promote heavily through the chaplaincy. Oops, did you knock something then?
So it just fell on the floor. Don't worry about it. It's
okay.
All right.
That we tried to promote that through the school chaplaincy model, placing youth workers and ministers right at the heart of the school, supporting counselling and just being alongside young people, but also promoting the Christian faith. And it was a really successful model in the end. And there are still some schools that have chaplains because of the work that you seeded and we began together. But we also did some exciting things abroad as well, Peter, didn't we? We went to. I interviewed Lindy from South Africa last week about our youth, reminding us about our youth pilgrimage and linking with her in the future. So we went to South Africa together and worked with schools and churches there. But we also went to Hong Kong and had an experience there of supporting their church schools.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things it's easy to do, is to see the Christian faith and the message of the Christian faith being focused in one particular place, but it's a universal message. So we went to South Africa and we experienced those incredible moments in South Africa, incredible poverty, incredible affluence, and children who had nothing. I will never forget, feeding 500 children with peanut butter sandwiches, and I can't stand peanut butter. And they had, they had a sandwich each. And at the end of it, this little boy had a sandwich in his pocket. And I said to him, are you not hungry? He said, no, my brother's not very well. I'm taking it home for him. You know,
Yeah.
when you think people have the least in society are prepared to help, their families like that, it was just an incredible message of the gospel. And South Africa taught me so much, not least walking on the plains of Modderport with you. But then I went to Hong Kong with the University of Cumbria when I was its Pro-Chancellor, and I was sitting at a dinner there, and somebody said to the then Vice-Chancellor, Chris Carr, we need some help with our church schools. Do you know anybody who can help? And he just simply said, the man sitting next to him. And the rest was history. Then we had those trips to Hong Kong, and we saw the affluence, we sat in the Foreign Correspondents Club and were told by a senior minister in Hong Kong that in 20 years' time, there'd only be 2 languages in the world, Mandarin and English, and the rest would be dialects. And it was a huge privilege, but they needed our help, and they were open to it. But, when you get there, you do realise that people being educated in Hong Kong, they are so keen to learn.
Yeah.
They're so desperate to learn, and it was another experience.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I would say to anybody, and I think you would too, that people talk about being ordained and what you do. For you and I, it's opened some doors in all sorts of different places. We've had such privileges that we would probably never have had if we hadn't been ordained.
Yeah, that's right. And certainly, I mean, the story of my ordination really started, as you said, on the plains of Modderport when we had that conversation, and that started that chain of events, really. So you were very inspirational in my faith journey towards ordination. But as you say, we've seen a real diversity of Christian expression just within the Anglican communion across the world, both in our country and in other countries. But it all starts, doesn't it, from this gospel passage that we've had today, with Jesus first sending out his disciples. We've talked a little bit about the fact that they will face persecution as they go, and that's difficult, and we ought to expect that. But Jesus also says to his disciples, well, don't be afraid of that. Continue to proclaim confidently, regardless of what fears may come or what persecution may come. Proclaim the gospel faithfully and proclaim it loud. Proclaim from the rooftops, I think he says in the passage. And that's one thing that you've always done, and that's, I guess, what's inspired me in your ministry. And also, it's been great working together with you. But Jesus also says, and I think that we'll probably finish on this point, that they don't go alone, that God is always with them. And I think that's the reassuring point. Jesus is not afraid to tell them the realities of what they're going to face, but he's also wants to reassure them that God is with them. And he uses that analogy about the sparrows falling from the tree, and God notices that, and he knows how many hairs are on our head. Perhaps that's for others rather than me, but certainly the message is there that God is with them as they go, no matter what they face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important thing is that you've just got to simply love God and accept that he is guiding you. And there are times when you don't know where that will take you. But what I've always believed very strongly in is that you've got to be the same to everybody. And it doesn't matter whether, it's the beg. I mean, when I was a parish priest at Christchurch, I used to go to court with homeless people who've been arrested outside HSBC for begging. And I used to argue they don't commit an offence till some middle-class Googler throws money in their cap.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with sitting on the floor outside HSBC. And I think it's that. And I've had that huge privilege of being able to work and minister with people in all sorts of places, on all sorts of journeys. And it's absolutely about that challenge. But I think the challenge of this morning's gospel is that, we are called to love God more than we love ourselves. And I think that's a huge challenge for all of us, to be honest. Yeah. Because anybody who says, well, I've always done God's will and not mine, well, forgive me, but I severely doubt that is the case. I've even met some very holy nuns, but they weren't always as holy as they looked when they were fighting on a Sunday afternoon and I had to go and separate them. So I think I think that's the challenge, and that's the challenge that's before us, and it will be a challenge for everybody, and we will fall down on it. But so did the first disciples.
Yeah.
The only person who never fell down on it was Jesus himself.
Yeah, yeah. He provides us, ultimately provides us with the great model, doesn't he? And even do when we do let him down, he's still there to restore us when we come to him in penitence. Peter, you've had a really this has been great to chat. There's loads more to say. Every sentence you bring opens up a new area of conversation that I could go down. But your rich and colourful ministry has been an inspiration to me, and I know to many others as well. And it's a great privilege to work with you again so closely, have you even in my parish, and be able to work and minister with you. So thank you for your insights this morning. Thank you for agreeing to be part of it, and I'm sure I'll see you very, very soon.
Thank you. Can I just say, though, that we're all products of the people we've walked alongside. And it's been a huge privilege to work with you and so many other people who are committed simply to passing on the love of God. And we learn so much from each other.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. Wonderful stuff. I'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.